what I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to use the resources that I'm going to use in part in my presentation are from the Wilder survey. Wilder does a survey every other year one night across the state of Minnesota to gather data about homelessness in the state of Minnesota. That's one source. The other source I'm going to be using is an annual report that the Minneapolis Public Schools does on homelessness and homeless and highly mobile children in the city of Minneapolis in the public schools. By the way, Elizabeth Hens is your key person if you want more information about that. We know her as Zib Hens, but she's the go-to person. So I'm going to jump right in. The state of Minnesota, based on the last Wilder survey that they published in 2012, shows us that we have over 10,000 adults, children, and youth that are homeless. That one night we were able to find through this survey over 10,000 adults, children, and youth that are homeless. Some of the factors that contribute to homelessness are things like eviction, loss of financial resources, unable to get along with others. Domestic violence is a key contributor to homelessness for families. Drug abuse, chemical dependency, those are all factors that lead to homelessness for families. One of the things that I think is startling or was a surprise was the number of homeless two-parent families. That jumped by, I think it's 24%, or 22% based on the Wilder survey. Homelessness is one of those things that really follows closely unemployment. And so when unemployment goes up, homelessness goes up. And I think that we can probably contribute this increase of two-parent households or two-parent families that are homeless to the housing difficulties that we've had over the last few years. Homeless children make up a very large portion of the homeless population. 1/3 of the homeless are families. 51% of the children in those homeless families, which is a little over, they counted a total of a little over 3,000 homeless families. I can tell you exactly at some point in my presentation, I have the exact number. 51% are 4 and younger. That's important for us to think about. So keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to that in my presentation. And as you can see, the numbers decrease. The second largest group of homeless children are 6 to 12. The next are adolescents. So homeless young children, infant or newborn to 4 years old, make up the largest portion of homeless children based on the Wilder study. So now we know a little bit about homelessness across the state of Minnesota. We know that there's a large and growing population. The 2012 data shows a smaller number of, it's still a larger number, but smaller than 2006 to 2009. But still, this population is not decreasing. It's continuing to increase over the years. And homeless children continue to represent a significant portion of the homeless across the state of Minnesota. So what do we know about homeless children in the city of Minneapolis? Well, we know that a little over 6,000, almost 6,500 children and youth are homeless in the city of Minneapolis. That's a significant number. There's a concentration of homelessness in the city of Minneapolis. That has a huge impact on public education. So we know that. We know about 1,800 children were counted in the last year that were considered homeless and highly mobile. And the thing that's most important about this to me is when we think about what these children bring into the classroom environment, into the school building when they come homeless. And there's multiple traumas that are typically associated with homelessness, and I'll talk about that a little more as I go forward. These children come with elevated levels of cortisol, which means they're hypervigilant. Their behaviors they're having difficulty managing their behavior. They didn't learn self-regulation in their home environment. They have had to move around. They've seen violence. these are the characteristics of the children that are homeless that come into the public school buildings, that come into our buildings. So another factor I want to point out is the disparity in homeless among African American and Native American families, especially when we compare them to the population in general. African American and Native American families are wildly overrepresented in the homeless population. And that's something that we have to keep in mind as well as we think about strategies to address homelessness and to reduce homelessness. We have a population that is primarily African American and Native American. We also know that based on the data from the Minneapolis Public Schools, as I said earlier, about 1,800 children were identified last year that were homeless and highly mobile in the public schools. And if we look at the breakdown in terms of age group of homeless children in the city of Minneapolis, the largest groups are infant to 4 years old, and that's consistent with the Wilder data. The next largest group is grades 1 through 5. So that's about 5 years old to 10 years old. Those are the two among the homeless children in the city of Minneapolis. They're concentrated in those two age groups. Again, it's important for us to keep that in mind as we think about educating this population of children, that there's homelessness is affecting their lives at a very early stage, and it's continuing until they're getting into about the 5th grade. I like to think about, when I looked at this data, it immediately reminded me of, that first our children learn to read, and then they read to learn. Imagine what these children are imagine what's happening in terms of these children's ability to learn to read and read to learn when they are struggling, their entire family is struggling with homelessness and all the trauma that comes along with that. So we know a little bit about the children, we know a little bit about homelessness in the state and in the city. Let's talk about the parents that are homeless. So I'm going to read this first statement to you. The trauma of homelessness and severe poverty can dramatically compromise a child's opportunity for healthy development. Really, that's it in a nutshell. Severe poverty, homelessness, and other trauma compromise a healthy development of children. Now, one thing that we do know, so as I talk about homeless parents, I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to keep in mind the compromise of healthy development. Well, we know that parents that are homeless were often homeless as children. There is a thread that we're seeing in our data, and those of us that work with homeless families have seen this for years. There's a thread of generational homelessness. Adults that are now homeless were homeless as children. Their children that are having children bring homelessness as part of their life experience. And the associated trauma that their parents experience have become part of the young parents' experience. So we see a generational pattern occurring, not only based on what we know, those of us that work with homeless families, but the data proves it to be true. 30% of women experience homelessness compared to 21% of men who experience homelessness as children. Now, what does that mean? I'm not sure what that means. But we know that domestic violence has a profound impact on homelessness. Many families end up homeless because of domestic violence. Maybe that's why that figure is higher for women than it is for men. Women are more likely to be the head of the family. They're in the primary care, they're primary caregivers for children in homeless families. Much smaller percentage of men are the primary caregivers. Another thing we know about homeless parents is that they have experienced severe and significant trauma in their lives. The Wilder research tells us that, I'm going to read you the data because it gets to you really deeply. 30% of homeless adults were physically abused as children. Now, based on the survey that they did one night, they were able to tell us that 37% of homeless adults were physically abused as children, 26% were sexually abused as children, 21% were neglected as children, meaning they were not provided adequate housing, food, or health care, or were left to care for themselves when they were not old enough to do so. So the experience that adults that are now responsible for the care of children is filled with trauma. So, how do we break this cycle? What is it that we can do to begin to break this cycle? Because we are seeing this generational pattern as I described earlier. Well, that's where my work comes in. Now, I will admit to you, I don't have the best mousetrap. I don't have the better mousetrap. What I do have are some strategies that we have implemented that we've begun to see some benefits. Staff that work with homeless families have the closest relationship with families. The families come to really rely on their relationship with frontline staff that work with them on a daily basis, those that are in supportive housing and in shelters. So our primary goal is what is up here, to improve the health and well-being of very young children who've experienced homelessness. That's the goal, that's the primary goal. So how do we do that? Well, the Visible Child Initiative was created to elevate the visibility of homeless young children because they kind of disappear in the landscape. School-aged children have to get to school, they need homework help, there's all kinds of, McKinney-Vento is in place to really address the needs of homeless school-aged children. There is language in McKinney-Vento to address the needs of very young children, but there's no money attached to it. So young children 4 and under just kind of fade. They fade away. So my responsibility is to elevate homeless young children among the folks that provide services and in public policy. So an example of what I do is, one of the things that I've done is I've begun to train people on an evidence-based screening tool that can be used to identify children that are homeless, that are having difficulty in their social emotional development. Now, many of you know that social emotional development is key to kindergarten readiness. So I've been training staff that work in supportive housing. When I started, the 17 organizations that I was working with, none of them were using any type of evidence-based practices. In the years that I've been working with organizations, 70% of those 17 organizations are now using evidence-based practices, and they're using a screening tool to identify children that are having difficulty in their social emotional development. The ASQSE, for those of you know what that is. So we can see change. So that's one strategy that the Visible Child Initiative has implemented. Another key strategy that we've implemented is training. Staff that come to this work don't come because they're early childhood development specialists. That's not what brings them to this work. So they need opportunities to understand children's mental health, how to work with families and adults that have experienced significant trauma, how to support parents in their role as parents when the parent is bringing so much negative history with them, how to help parents understand how they can support their children's development so that they're school ready. That is the work that I've been doing. We provide training on a monthly basis. I've listed these trainings here for you. This year, what I've done is I focused our training on adolescents. Been hearing from staff that working with adolescents, and in particular adolescent parents, it's really challenging because you've got these competing developmental needs that are going on between the parent and their young children. And so I focused our training this year on working with adolescents that are homeless. I encourage you to go onto our website, and you can find out more about our training, and you can actually register on our website. Another strategy that I've implemented is called the 90-day window for children. And this is a strategy that requires that call staff to pay attention to the mental health needs of young children within the first 90 days of moving into the housing. So within 90 days, there is a plan in place that can be used by staff and parents to support children's health and well-being and support their healthy development. Keeping in mind that staff typically, I did some research, and some of you have copies of the Infant Toddler Discovery Project, a research project that I did. And staff were terribly reluctant to get in that baby, that mother-child, young child relationship. I don't know what to do. What do I do? So that in part is what led me to create some of these strategies to help staff think about and develop some practices that they can use with parents in support of young children's development. Another strategy is ensuring that young children who've experienced homelessness, increasing their access to children's mental health services. Again, these young children are bringing, you can tell as early as 3 months a child that is having difficulty in their social emotional development. You are actually able to identify a child as young as 3 months that is having difficulty in that area of development. A child that isn't connected, isn't showing a healthy attachment relationship to their parent, that's a child that's experiencing difficulty. So it really is possible. So we've developed some strategies to increase young children's access to children's mental health services. The other aspect of my work is to influence public policy and to elevate the needs of young homeless children in public policy. And that has been a challenge. That has been a challenge for us. But in 2013, we were able to get some legislation passed that is a small step, but an important step, that requires all interagency early intervention committees across the state of Minnesota to have representatives that can help them identify young children that are eligible for early intervention services. Young children meaning infants and toddlers. That's huge. That's huge for us. That homeless young children across the state, there's some legislation that says pay attention. That's a huge step for us. And the Department of Education has to report back to the legislature. How'd it go? How many kids did you find? What's going on? That was also passed as part of the legislation. So I'm gonna end with this. I usually when I talk to parents about healthy development and school readiness, I talk about social emotional development. And of course, the question is, well, what is that? So I use this information to describe what social emotional development is. A group of kindergarten teachers were polled. I found this in some research. I think this happened in Boston. The research, I think, is from the early 2000s, maybe 2002. The kindergarten teachers were polled and they were asked, so what do you need a child to do? What do you need to see in a child to know that they're ready for kindergarten? And the teacher's response was, well, I can teach letters. I can teach numbers. I can teach concepts. But what I can't do right away is help a child learn how to sit in circle time, follow simple directions, keep their hands to themselves, make requests, come to an adult when they need help. Those are all examples of social emotional development. Parents understand that really easily. A child that goes into the preschool classroom or the kindergarten classroom that isn't able to follow simple directions, participate in circle time, keep their hands to themselves, ask for help when they need, those are children that are not going to experience success in that classroom. Parents understand that, and more than anything, they want their children to be successful. That is one of the greatest hopes that they have when you talk to them. And they see their children as being successful. So I'm going to tell you a little story about my niece. Years ago, she's a grown woman now, but her and some of my nieces and nephews were at my house playing. And she came to me and she said, Auntie Sharon, why is Binky, that was our cat, why is Binky making all that noise? And I said, well, honey, she's in heat. And she said, oh, okay. And she went on and played. And about an hour later or so, she came back and she said, Auntie Sharon, I thought you said Binky was in heat. I said, well, she is, honey. Well, why is she on the aerator? And I realized, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I tried my best to explain what being in heat is, and it has nothing to do with the heat coming from the aerator. But I must have satisfied her because she was able to go on and do other things. But in that one example, in that one interaction between me and my niece, I saw all of the school readiness skills that she already had. She was able to come to an adult and ask a question. She wanted information. She knew she could come to an adult and seek out that information. She was curious. One of the things that kindergarten teachers say, I need a child that's curious and enthusiastic, has some self-regulation skills. She was curious. And the last thing is that she was able to receive the information, process it, and move on. That's a perfect example of a child that has some strong readiness skills. I hope this presentation has been useful to you. I hope I didn't go too far over my time, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you.